Hi, my name is Bill Robertson, and I've spent a lot of my life studying about the Pennsylvania Bucktail Regiment that fought in the Civil War. And in 2019, I put out this book just called the Pennsylvania Bucktails. And the purpose for putting it out, I tell about in the author's note on the back. And I'd just like to read this to you to give you an idea of my purpose in doing this book. I first saw the 42nd Pennsylvania Bucktail Monument on a school trip to Gettysburg Battlefield in 1962 when I was in the 6th grade. The striking stone soldier pictured on the front cover later served as inspiration for a 7-novel series about the famous Pennsylvania sharpshooters that I penned with my teaching colleague David Reimer. This book is meant as a brief history and introduction to the Civil War Bucktails. And again, the striking stone soldier is on that monument down in Gettysburg that's dedicated to the 42nd Pennsylvania Bucktails. Unfortunately, after I put this book out, I found out that it was too expensive for a lot of people to buy because it's a photo book, and it was really difficult to put out enough copies for one thing, and also the expense of it. And there's so much great information in here that I hope that school students around the area would probably like. So I figured there's got to be another alternative that I could use to mass produce this so that it would be readily available, especially for school districts. And I came upon the idea of putting out a documentary, a DVD movie about the Bucktails. And in this movie, I took a lot of the information I had in this book, which actually acts as the blueprint for my documentary, and created small chapters that I then posted on YouTube, and had my friend from Mansfield University put together the different little videos. And his name is Mark Polonia, and he's a tech guy over to Mansfield. Eventually, we decided we were going to string all these different small videos together and produce this documentary. And today I'd like to show you this documentary so you can get an idea of, again, you can get a free peek at it, because there's a lot of great, just basic Civil War information, and also more specific information about the Bucktail Regiment that was formed when Colonel King in 1861 went to Smithport, Pennsylvania to the Bennett House Hotel, set up his headquarters there, and organized the original company of the Bucktails. So again, this is good local history that I'm sure will appeal to a lot of history buffs. And the students will like this too, because I string together these small videos. I'd like to, again, tell you what chapters are also in this DVD. First of all, I have the birth of the Bucktails. Next is the Bucktails uniform and gear, so you can see what they actually wore into battle. Then there's the rifles used by the Bucktails. Then the Bucktail battle tactics that they used. And the Bucktails were the skirmishers, like today's Army Rangers. They're in the thick of all the major battles. Also, number 5 is the Bucktails at Antietam and Fredericksburg. Then the Bucktails at Gettysburg. And that battle was really bloody for them, and they played a prominent role in it too. All right, 7 is the Bucktails' last campaigns. It takes you right to the end of their term of service, when they mustered out in 1864, the May of that year. Then I have the Bucktails colonels, the Bucktail casualties that were suffered, also some Civil War humor to add a little to the, legacy of the Bucktails. Also to tell you a little bit about the lore associated with the regiment. Okay, then there's also 3 other different Bucktail regiments a lot of people have never heard of. There was the 149th Bucktails, which I have a chapter about, and also the 150th Bucktails. And the original Bucktails didn't like it that these new regiments were given Bucktails without having earned them, so they called them the bogus Bucktails. And yet they proved their mettle at Gettysburg and were really good Bucktail units. Also, I have a chapter on the 190th Bucktails. And these guys were formed in the field after the original guys mustered out. And their colonel decided he wanted to continue on and fight to the end of the war. And so the 190th Bucktails were born. Also, I have a chapter, or actually it's just a Bucktail poem that I wrote, which sort of glorifies the regiment. Also, there's a chapter about me and, just tell a little bit about my background. And finally, I have a chapter on Bucktail reference books. So if you want to find out more about the Bucktails and go delve into it in more detail, you'll be able to see which books I actually used to put together this documentary. Okay, so without further ado, I'll just say thank you for tuning in and thank you for the interest in the Bucktails, and now we'll watch the video.
After the Civil War began with the fall of Fort Sumter on April 14, 1861, President Abraham Lincoln put out a call for 75,000 volunteers to squelch the rebel menace. The first Pennsylvanian to offer his services was Thomas Leaper Kane. He set up his headquarters at the Bennett House Hotel in Smethport, PA, and began recruiting a company of McKean County hunters, loggers, and farmers that would form the nucleus of his new rifle regiment. The name of the unit came about by accident when James Landrigan, after signing the muster roll, walked across the street, cut the tail off a deer hanging in a meat market, and stuck the tail in his hat. Colonel Kane saw this as the perfect symbol for his group of crack shots. Soon, the caps of all who enlisted sported deer tails or pieces of deer hide. Colonel Kane then marched his recruits through the wilderness to Emporium, where they were joined by other hardy woodsmen from Cameron County. This force continued on foot down the Cinnamahoney Creek until they reached Driftwood. A company from Elk County joined them there and helped construct rafts that were used to get the regiment to Lock Haven. The Bucktails then boarded a train that took them to Camp Curtin in Harrisburg, where they were accepted into the Pennsylvania Reserve Corps. The Bucktails were designated as the 13th Pennsylvania Reserves. Other names they went by were the 1st Pennsylvania Rifles, the Kane Rifles, and later the 42nd PA Volunteers. In Harrisburg, Kane gave up command of the regiment to Colonel Charles Biddle because Biddle had served in the Mexican War and had more experience training troops. In December 1861, the Bucktails were dispatched to Northern Virginia and saw their first action at Drainesville. During the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Kane was shot through the face by a rebel sniper. Heroically, he wobbled to his feet, picked up his sword, and led the winning charge against a group of Confederates who were trying to outflank the Yankee line. Drainesville was the first Union victory of the Civil War and one of many bloody engagements fought by the Bucktails. Reenactor First Sergeant Clarence Walker models the uniform worn by the Bucktail Regiment. He wears the standard blue kepi cap of the Union Army decorated with a buck's tail. He also dons a dark blue wool sack coat that has 4 brass buttons. His trousers are made of medium blue wool. On his feet, Clarence wears brogans with soles so slippery heel nails or a heel plate are needed to keep him from falling down. Around his waist is a black leather belt with a U.S. brass buckle. His canteen is equipped with a cork stopper and a blue wool cover. A Masonic symbol is sewn on the cover to show Walker belongs to this esteemed organization. The sergeant has a haversack made of leather to carry his food. Canvas haversacks were also popular because they weighed less. Clarence's cartridge box is stuffed with 40 rounds of ammo. Confident Bucktail said they carried 40 dead men in this pouch. A cap box houses the brass caps Walker needs to fire his Sharps rifle. The rifle is topped by a ring bayonet with a 17-inch blade that was used in close combat. On his back, Clarence carries a rolled blanket, a knapsack, and half a shelter tent. In winter, he wears a medium blue overcoat to protect him from the elements when camping or on sentry duty. Some soldiers threw these coats away during the summer campaigns rather than lug them into battle and paid the consequences when cold weather returned. The soldiers of the Bucktail Regiment were employed as scouts and skirmishers by the Union Army during the American Civil War. They were Pennsylvania's equivalent of Berdan's sharpshooters. As elite troops, they carried the finest rifles of the day. On August 6, 1861, the Bucktails received rifled Springfield and Enfield muskets that fired, respectively, .58 and .577 caliber mini balls. Accurate up to 700 yards, these weapons could be loaded and shot 3 times a minute. The personal guns the recruits had brought with them to boot camp were then collected and sent home. Before embarking on the Antietam campaign in September of 1862, the Bucktails got Sharps rifles. These were .52 caliber breech loaders that fired paper cartridges. A soldier could shoot 10 shots a minute with his Sharps, greatly improving the firepower of the regiment. Finally, the Bucktails were issued Spencer repeaters before the Wilderness Campaign in May 1864. The lever-action .52 caliber rifles held 7 rimfire cartridges in the magazine. As the joke went, you could load these guns on Sunday and shoot them all week. Cartridge boxes generally held 40 rounds of ammo. Once armed with Spencers, the confident marksman said they carried 40 dead men in their leather pouches. At the beginning of the Civil War, both Union and Confederate generals used Napoleonic battle tactics they learned at West Point Military Academy. The armies, in close formation, would march toward one another until within musket range. Then, standing in the open, they'd shoot at each other, knocking men from the opposite ranks with volley fire. The force that outflanked its adversary or held the high ground usually won. The Bucktails, though, when deployed as skirmishers, fought Indian style. It was their job to locate the enemy, make contact with him, and assess his strength. The first rifles spread out in a skirmish line with several yards between each marksman. They advanced cautiously, dodging from tree to tree or rock to rock. When discovered by their foe, they took cover and returned fire. Being crack shots, they made the Johnnies pay. A good example of this strategy was employed at the Battle of Harrisonburg during the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1862. Colonel Tom Kane led his skirmishers forward to rescue a contingent of wounded New Jersey troopers. Upon encountering the 58th Virginia Infantry, the Bucktails scattered into the bush and poured a volley into the oncoming rebels. Next, they blew General Turner Ashby's horse out from under him and killed him when he led another charge on foot. By then, a second Reb regiment began outflanking the Tails. Kane was wounded twice and captured during the conflict. His men, shooting from cover, continued to fight bravely until forced to retreat. The Bucktail skirmishing talents were again on display at the Battle of South Mountain in September of 1863. Now, commanded by Colonel Hugh McNeil, The sharpshooters led the Pennsylvania reserves up a slope encumbered by brush and boulders toward an equal number of Alabamians sheltered in a stone fort. Rebs were so protected that McNeil used a neat trick to kill 2 of them with one shot. He fired at the slanted rock in front of them and ricocheted his bullet into their hiding place. Later, he ordered his men to simply fire at the stone fort to keep the enemy's heads down while sending a flanking force up the mountain to surround the Rebs. At Antietam Creek, the Bucktails bivouacked with Fighting Joe Hooker's I Corps. On the evening of September 16, 1862, the regiment, acting as Union skirmishers, made first contact with Robert E. Lee's Confederates near the East Woods. After Colonel Hugh McNeil was killed in a charge across a plowed field, the Bucktails chased the enemy into the woods and engaged in a firefight with him all night. At dawn, the 1st Rifles blasted Trimble's brigade near the Mooma Farm until they ran out of ammunition. The regiment was then held in reserve and missed the action in the cornfield and at Bloody Lane. After Antietam, General George McClellan was relieved of command of the Union Army and replaced by Ambrose Burnside. Burnside ordered his troops to Fredericksburg, where the Confederates had taken up defensive positions atop a hill across the Rappahannock River. The 1st Rifles were sent to the left of the Union line opposite Stonewall Jackson's rebels. During the attack of December 13th, the Bucktails, now under the command of Captain Fred Taylor, found a gap in the enemy entrenchments and burst through. If reinforced, they could have won the battle. Instead, the rebels poured deadly fire into them from 3 sides, and the Tails suffered their worst casualties of the war. In February of 1863, the Bucktails were recalled to the defenses of Washington and set up their winter camp at Fairfax Station, Virginia. While serving there, the riflemen fought many small skirmishes with rebel guerrillas and the Gray Ghost, John Mosby. They were pitted against these irregulars until Robert E. Lee invaded Pennsylvania. Marching furiously north, they finally overtook the rest of the Union troops at Frederick, Maryland. Added to the 5th Corps of the Federal Army, the Bucktails were then renamed the 42nd Pennsylvania Volunteers. After another all-night march, the 42nd reached the Great Battle of Gettysburg on noon of the 2nd day's fight, July 2nd, 1863. The Bucktails were rushed to the summit of Little Round Top just in time to repulse a rebel charge. They then drove the enemy downhill and on across Bloody Run to the vicinity of the Devil's Den. Colonel Charles F. Taylor was killed while scouting the strength of the rebels that evening. On July 3rd, the Bucktails were sent to the left of the wheat field to silence a Confederate battery. In the process, they outflanked the Devil's Den, forcing Reb snipers to withdraw. During the day's action, Sergeant James Thompson of Company G captured an enemy battle flag, for which he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. After Gettysburg, the Bucktails shadowed Lee's retreating army until the Johnnies escaped across the Potomac River. The regiment then refitted near Rappahannock Station, Virginia, for the entire summer of 1863. It wasn't until the end of November that the Tails saw major action again when they participated in General George Meade's futile mine run campaign. In the spring of 1864, U.S. Grant took command of the Union Army and attacked the rebels in the wilderness from May 4th through the 6th. The first Rifles fought sparingly there until engaged in a sharp battle with the Confederate rear guard. From May 8th until May 20th, the regiment, now under the command of Major Ross Hartshorn, fought brutal trench warfare at Spotsylvania Courthouse. On May 30th, 1864, the Bucktails saw their final action at Bethesda Church before mustering out of the Army. They stayed an extra day after their term of service expired, so enough troops were in rank to defeat the advancing enemy. The Bucktail Regiment was a brainchild of Thomas Leeper Kane, who was born on January 27, 1822 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. After studying in Paris, France, Thomas learned the lawyer's trade from his father, a federal judge. Kane was an abolitionist and a friend of the Mormons before the outbreak of the Civil War. He also founded the town of Kane, Pennsylvania. After organizing the first Pennsylvania Rifles, he declined the colonelcy in favor of the more experienced Charles Biddle and became the lieutenant colonel instead. He was wounded at the Battle of Drainesville, Virginia, and yet led the winning charge that chased the rebels from the field. Kane left the Bucktails on September 7, 1862, when he was promoted to brigadier general. He rose from his sickbed in Baltimore to fight with his brigade at the Battle of Gettysburg. After the war, Kane built the famous Kinzua Railroad Viaduct to transport coal from his mines in McKean County, Pennsylvania, to the Buffalo, New York market. He died of pneumonia on December 26, 1883. Thomas is buried between the two entrances to the Kane Memorial Chapel in Kane, PA. Charles Biddle fought in the Mexican War and was promoted to major for his bravery at the Battle of Chapultepec. Born in Philadelphia on April 30, 1819, Biddle was a lawyer in civilian life after graduating from Princeton College. He was 42 years old when he again enlisted in the Army as Lieutenant Colonel of the Bucktails. On June 12, 1861, he was elected Colonel of the regiment because of his previous war experience. After whipping the Tails into fighting shape, he resigned his command when elected to Congress in October of 1861. After the war, Biddle was editor of the Philadelphia Age. He died on September 28, 1873, and was buried in St. Peter's Episcopal Churchyard in Philadelphia, PA. Hugh McNeil was born on January 10, 1830, in Owasco, New York. He worked for the United States Coast Survey and the U.S. Treasury Department before moving to Warren, PA, where he was employed by the Warren Bank. McNeil was 31 years old at the outbreak of the Civil War and elected First Lieutenant of Company D after enlisting in the Bucktails. On January 22, 1862, he was then elected Colonel of the regiment at Camp Pierpont, Virginia. Typhoid fever kept McNeil out of the Peninsula Campaign, but he rejoined the Bucktails in time to fight the Second Battle of Bull Run. He was shot and killed at the Battle of Antietam on September 16, 1862, while leading a charge across a plowed field near the East Wood. McNeil is buried at Fort Hill Cemetery, Auburn, New York. Charles Frederick Taylor was born on February 6, 1840, at Westchester, Pennsylvania. After a year at the University of Michigan and a tour of Europe, He managed his father's farm near Kennett Square, PA. Taylor was elected captain of Company H of the Bucktails. He displayed his bravery at the Battle of Harrisonburg, Virginia, when he tried rescuing the wounded Lieutenant Colonel Kane, but was captured instead. After being exchanged, he took command of the Bucktails as the senior ranking officer. He was wounded at the Battle of Fredericksburg and promoted to colonel soon after. At age 23, he was the youngest colonel in the Union Army. Taylor was killed on July 2nd, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg while scouting the strength of the Confederate position near the Devil's Den. He is buried at the Longwood Cemetery in his hometown of Kennett Square. W. Ross Hartshorn, born January 26, 1839, was made adjutant of the Bucktails after serving as first lieutenant with Company K of Clarefield County. He was promoted to major before the Battle of Gettysburg and took command of the regiment following Colonel Taylor's death. Bravely, he led the 1st Rifles through the deadly battles of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and Bethesda Church. After the Bucktails mustered out of service on May 31, 1864, Hartshorn re-enlisted in the 190th Veteran Volunteers as their colonel. On March 13, 1865, he was brevetted Brigadier General for conspicuous gallantry and meritorious service throughout the war. Hartshorn died on January 12, 1905, and was buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in Curwensville, Pennsylvania. "1,165 officers and men served in the 1st Pennsylvania Rifles. During their 3-year enlistment, 11 officers and 151 soldiers were killed or mortally wounded. 2 Bucktail officers and 88 enlisted men also succumbed to disease. 442 were wounded but recovered. The regiment's worst casualties were suffered at the Battle of Fredericksburg, where 19 Bucktails were killed and 113 wounded. Among the wounded were Captain Fred Taylor and Captain Edward Irving. At Gettysburg, 7 more lives were lost and 39 riflemen were treated for injuries. Promoted to colonel, Taylor was shot and killed near the Devil's Den. Overall, disease struck down more combatants than bullets did during the Civil War. The main problem was that no one knew germs existed. Soldiers often drank contaminated water and contracted typhoid or dysentery. The latter, nicknamed the Virginia Quickstep, killed 45,000 Union troops and 50,000 Confederates. The soldiers got severe diarrhea and literally pooped themselves to death. 1 out of every 3 people who caught typhoid died of it. The symptoms included headaches, fever, chills, and constipation. There were also deadly outbreaks of measles that swept through both armies, while pneumonia took another 35,000 lives. Infection due to surgery was an issue too. Mini balls shattered the bones they hit, causing a high rate of amputations. After every battle, mountains of severed arms and legs could be seen outside the hospital tents. During surgery, doctors seldom cleaned their equipment between patients. If the first fellow had blood poisoning, the next one treated would get it as well. In all, 63% of Union deaths were due to disease, 12% due to wounds, and 19% the result of fatal battle injuries. Some thought it was better to die by the bullet than fall victim to a surgeon's bone saw. The steward was another member of the medical department that wounded men came to fear. He kept the hospital records and operated the dispensary. Because he needed to know reading, writing, math, and chemistry, he held the rank of ordnance sergeant. Some of the pills he concocted contained mercury. Many soldiers who took them went mad after the war. Prescribing opium for diarrhea was equally deadly. Civil War soldiers created their own unique language. They called going into combat seeing the elephant, and referred to bullets as bumblebees, and artillery shells as cook stoves because of the sound they made. The casualty list was the butcher's bill, and a dead body was somebody's darling. They also had colorful names for the liquor they drank, calling it Tanglefoot, Popskull, and 40 Rod. To get drunk was to have a brick in one's hat. The miserable food they consumed drew their ire too. They ate hellfire stew, pickled mule, and embalmed beef. Their coffee was subtle poison, while the hardtack biscuits, some left over from the Revolutionary War, were vilified as teeth dullers, sheet iron crackers, or Lincoln pie. Such dark humor helped the Bucktails cope with the brutality of war. After the 13th PA Reserves performed gallantly during the Peninsula Campaign of 1862, Major Roy Stone was sent back to Pennsylvania to raise more regiments of Bucktails. By the end of August, the 149th and 150th units had been organized. The Battle of Antietam, however, brought an end to further recruitment when the riflemen were rushed to Washington to guard the capital. In February of 1863, the Bucktails were sent to Belle Plaine, Virginia to complete their training. Soon after their arrival, Roy Stone was given command of his own brigade, consisting of the 149th, 150th, and 143rd PA regiments. Leadership of the 149th then fell to Lieutenant Colonel Walton Dwight, who readied his troops for combat in time for the summer campaign. The 149th received its baptism of fire during the Chancellorsville action, performing ably for General Joe Hooker's Union Army. Gettysburg, though, was the regiment's crowning achievement when it withstood rebel cannon bombardments and unrelenting infantry attacks for over 2 hours during the first day's battle near McPherson's barn. The 149th lost 80% of its men at Gettysburg and was then brought back to regimental strength with draftees of questionable valor. This left a small corps of battle-tested veterans to lead the Bucktails in the gruesome Wilderness and Spotsylvania courthouse campaigns that put them in harm's way for 2 grueling weeks. Equally brutal were the Battle of Cold Harbor and the Siege of Petersburg. Add a tour of duty guarding the infamous Elmira prison camp, and the 149th visited every circle of Civil War hell. This regiment of new Bucktails was recruited in Philadelphia and in Crawford, Union, and McKean counties. Langhorne Wister was the unit's colonel, with Henry S. Hydecopper serving as lieutenant colonel and Thomas Chamberlain as major. While guarding the city of Washington, Company K was assigned as President Lincoln's personal bodyguard. The other 9 companies were sent to Belle Plaine, Virginia in February 1863. After further training, they participated in the Battle of Chancellorsville on the 2nd of May, but saw little action. Like its sister regiment, the 149th, the 150th proved its valor on the first day's action at Gettysburg near McPherson's barn. Lieutenant Colonel Hydecopper won the Medal of Honor for continuing to lead his men after being severely wounded. During the battle, though, the regimental colors were captured and later presented to Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy. The 150th also served with distinction in the Wilderness and at Spotsylvania Courthouse. On May 23rd, at the North Anna River, the Bucktails stopped a rebel charge that attempted to roll up the Union flank. After the Battle of Bethesda Church, the 150th was sent to fight in the Siege of Petersburg and later assigned to guard the Elmira, New York prison camp that was often called Helmira. Colonel Ross Hartshorn organized the 190th Pennsylvania Veteran Volunteer Infantry after the Battle of Bethesda Church on May 31, 1864. Hartshorn led the original Bucktails until they mustered out of service, and half of his old command joined his new regiment once they learned they'd be fighting under the Bucktail flag. After a fierce skirmish with the Rebs in White Oak Swamp on June 13th, the 190th marched to the James River and crossed in transports to join the left flank of the Union Army on the Dimmock line before Petersburg. The regiment's lieutenant colonel was Joseph Petit, while John Wolfe served as its major. The Bucktails spent most of the summer strengthening the Union fortifications around the rebel city. On August 18th through the 19th, they were assigned skirmish duty while the rest of the 5th Corps destroyed the Weldon Railroad. During this action, known as the Battle of Globe Tavern, the 190th was surrounded by the enemy and over 700 of them captured, including Colonel Hartshorn. For the survivors, the winter months were difficult as well. On December 7th through the 12th, the regiment participated in the infamous Applejack Raid, and on February 5th through the 8th, 1865, battled the Rebs near Dabney's Mill. On April 1st, with Lieutenant Colonel Petit in command, the Bucktails breached the angle in the rebels' line during the Battle of Five Forks. The next day, they began pursuit of Lee's Confederates, who had abandoned Petersburg to escape south. A grueling 8-day chase ensued, with a 42-mile forced march on April 8th needed to catch the rebels at Appomattox Courthouse. The Bucktails then pushed the enemy back into town, where Robert E. Lee surrendered on Palm Sunday, April 9th, 1865. The First PA Rifles by William P. Robertson. The first PA Rifles stepped forward to serve and leveled their sharps with the steadiest nerve. They came from the woods where wildcats stalk. They learned how to shoot before learning to walk. The rifles wore bucktails in their blue hats and fought with the fury of wild mountain cats. The first to see action, these skirmishers bold defied the thunder as cannon blasts rolled. Charging ahead with no fear of being slain, they stood up to volleys of musket ball rain. The rebel yell lost all its menace and ire when the first PA Rifles returned deadly fire. Their colonel was killed in the thick of a fight as daylight eclipsed into war's hellish night. The Bucktail banner by bullets was rent as legs piled high by the surgery tent. But nothing the Bucktails' memory can kill as long as the thunder still rolls down the hill. Watching from heaven in angels' bright guise, they protect our freedom with vigilant eyes. William P. Robertson graduated from Mansfield University in 1972 with a Bachelor's of Science in English. Since then, he has worked in factories, taught high school English, and run a successful house painting business. He began freelancing short stories, poetry, and articles in 1978, and his work has appeared in over 500 magazines worldwide. He has also published 71 books in the historical fiction, horror, and poetry genres. The 7-novel Bucktails series he penned with David Reimer has been used by school districts in Pennsylvania. In his spare time, Bill enjoys photography, trout fishing, and Civil War reenacting. He belongs to the Company I, 1st PA Rifles of McKean County. For more information about the author's writings, visit bucktailsandbroomsticks.com. History of the Bucktails gives a day-by-day account of what the 1st Pennsylvania Rifles endured during the Civil War. Author William H. Rauch served with the Bucktails and is considered their official historian. Co-author of the book is O.R. Howard Thompson, a noted librarian. Buck-tailed Wildcats was written by Edwin A. Glover, a Tioga County lawyer. He tells the same story as Rauch's regimental history, but in a more interesting and colorful writing style. Pennsylvania Bucktails by Patrick A. Schroeder gives a brief history of the 42nd, 149th, and 150th PA Volunteers. He also provides a photo gallery of each regiment taken from the collection of Ron Palm. The 149th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Unit in the Civil War serves as the regimental history of this famous Bucktail unit. It's penned by Richard E. Matthews, a retired high school principal from Slatington, PA. The book includes some great photos of the 149th soldiers and officers.